Everybody hates Reagan, and no small part of that is due to Reaganomics. So on this installment of the inconsistent mini-series, Everybody Hates Reagan, we're going to talk about Reaganomics, or trickle-down economics, or supply-side economics, or voodoo economics. Because they're all the same thing, which is utter bullshit. Now, the year is 1980, and Jimmy Carter had spent the last 4 years making the hard decisions to right the economic woes of the Nixon administration's huge economic fuck-ups. And while the fruits of his labor were starting to pay off, it had still been a hard few years for most Americans. And most Americans have the same grasp of economics and civics as somebody who could bankrupt a casino. So when a man with the intelligence of a potato and the charisma of a D-list actor got up on stage and started preaching to the people about a new economic idea that would bring wealth and prosperity to them all, you had a bunch of people who likely would have been a big fan of the show Ow My Balls being like, I like money, and then followed him right past the overly affectionate Costco greeter all the way to the back of the giant Costco to find the time machine, not realizing that there was never going to be any money. Anyway, this exciting, fresh new idea that would bring wealth and prosperity to us all was that if we gave massive tax breaks and subsidies to wealthy corporations and people through their benevolence and good-heartedness, they just trickle it back down all over our faces. Now, if that sounds like the dumbest fucking idea for an economic system you've ever heard, that's because it is. But hey, how could they have known that it wasn't going to be successful? It was an exciting new idea that had never been tried before, right? Wrong. It was not new at all. Something the voters may have realized had they ever read a history book. Because we tried this in the 1880s and it ended in the Panic of 1896. And we're like, wow, that was a really dumb idea. Let's not do that again until like less than 2 decades later when Warren Harding came along and tried it all over. That time it worked out great, depressionally. So that time we're like, okay, fool me twice. And that got us FDR and Keynesian economics and the most functional economic system our country's ever had. That was until Ronnie Reagan decided to dust off the how to fuck shit up for idiots playbook and read about horse and sparrow economics. Because that's what it used to be called before the Reagan rebrand. Why horse and sparrow, you may ask? Well, honestly, it's probably the most apt description for this economic system. See, the theory is you have a horse, which represents the rich people, and you feed the horse more grain than it can possibly digest. And as a result, the horse shits out a bunch of undigested grain that then feeds the sparrows, us peasant folk. Now, that's a great example of this economic system because it is a really ineffective way to feed the birds. And if you feed a horse too much grain, it will eventually just colic and die, which is what happened during the Great Depression and Great Recession. Businesses just crumbled under the weight of their own greed and gluttony. But I guess saying that our economic plan is to feed you horse shit didn't sit well with the focus group, so they went with supply-side economics instead. Supply side being if we give all of the money and resources to the corporations that, supply the economy, they will create jobs and create supply, and demand will follow. Which is not how economics has ever worked, which is literally what every legitimate economist said then and has continued to say since then. It's also what every other Republican said at the time because even they knew how dumb this idea was. Daddy Bush was the one who coined the term voodoo economics because it would take black magic to make an economic system that stupid work. But hey, it was the 80s and cocaine is a hell of a drug, so policies didn't really need to make sense apparently as long as the person pitching them said it with a little bit of riz. That's the word of the year that all the kids are saying right now, right? So Reagan gets elected, starts taking credit for all of Carter's accomplishments, including the economy, and then just starts cutting taxes left and right. He cut the top tax rate from 73% to 28%, the lowest they'd been since 1925, right before the Great Depression. But he's like, don't worry, guys, these massive tax cuts are gonna pay for themselves if we just believe, because nothing is more powerful than an old dude with dementia's imagination. Surprisingly, they did not pay for themselves. Those massive tax cuts combined with huge increases in defense spending to build space lasers like he's Marjorie Taylor Greene's idea of a Jewish villain actually tripled the deficit from $700 billion to $2.1 trillion. Party of fiscal responsibility, am I right? GDP growth was more than cut in half from 4.6% under Carter to 2.1% during Reagan. Inflation adjusted disposable income went from $67,000 under Carter to $60,000 under Reagan. The unemployment rate reached the highest it had ever been since the Great Depression. Well, until Daddy Bush, his vice president, got elected immediately after him, and then he took the crown as the highest unemployment president since the Great Depression. Obviously, the rebranded eat shit economics wasn't working. So Clinton gets in and he raises the top tax rate back up to nearly 40%, corporate tax rate back up to 35%. He balances the budget and oversees some of the best economic metrics in our country's history. In fact, he's widely regarded as one of the best presidents for the economy since since FDR. Now, Clinton's economic policies were certainly neoliberal and had their fair share of issues that we're not going to get into right now, but it was clearly working better than the horseshit economics of Reagan. Then hanging Chad elects George Bush, and baby Bush was like, you know what we should do? Let's try all that economic system that didn't work any other time in the history of ever, because I got a good feeling about it. And then we got the Great Recession, and we're like, wow, this still doesn't work, and we still didn't go back to pre-Reagan tax rates. We've been stuck with trickle-down economics for 50 years, waiting for this golden shower, and it's starting to feel like we're getting pissed on. In fact, in the last half century, not only has nothing trickled down, the bottom 90% has been drying up. In 1980, average CEO to worker pay was 42 to 1, meaning that CEOs made 42 times their average worker's salary. Today, it's 324 to 1. In 1980, the 0.1% of wealthiest households controlled less than 8% of national wealth. Today, they control nearly 20%. Disposable income per capita in adjusted dollars has fallen from $68,000 in 1980 to $48,000 today. Average household saving rate from World War II to 1980 was 8%. Today, it's barely 2%. Instead of trickling down, cutting social programs and massive tax cuts for the wealthy has been like Bounty the quicker picker-upper, allowing greedy rich fucks to soak up every last drop of our wealth and turn us into a corporate plutocracy. As a commenter once suggested, the only way to really make trickle-down economics work is to institute piñata economics, which is where we beat the shit out of the top 1% with sticks until their money bags bust open, allowing their wealth to actually trickle down. I haven't run the numbers, but I think it's worth a try, because you'd have to be controlled by a black magic woman to think that voodoo economics was ever going to be successful. Nancy. And the fact that trickle-down economics has worked out for us like we're Donald Trump in a Russian hotel, well, that's just one more reason everybody hates Reagan.